Catherine Miller had always been the kind of woman who noticed small details. She would spot a bird's nest hidden in the most unlikely places, or find four-leaf clovers when others saw only ordinary grass. But on this particular morning in September, as she walked along the riverbank behind her childhood home, she wasn't looking for anything special. She was simply trying to clear her head after receiving some difficult news. The morning mist hung low over the water, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Catherine had returned to her family's old house in Millbrook after her father's funeral 3 weeks ago. The house felt too quiet, too empty, filled with memories that seemed to echo in every room. Her father, Robert Miller, had been a respected school principal in the small town for over 30 years. Everyone knew him, and everyone had a story about how he had helped them or their children. Catherine kicked at a small stone near the water's edge, watching it skip across the surface. She was trying to decide whether to sell the house or keep it. Her life was in the city now, working as a nurse at a busy hospital. But this place held so many memories of her mother, who had died when Catherine was only 12. As she bent down to pick up another stone, something glinted in the shallow water near a fallen log. At first, she thought it might be a piece of broken glass, but as she looked closer, she could see it was something metallic. Catherine rolled up her jeans and stepped into the cold water. The current was gentle here, and the water was only about 6 inches deep. When she reached down and lifted the object, her heart nearly stopped. It was a silver locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful. The chain was broken, which explained how it had ended up in the river. Catherine turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it. There was an intricate design on the front, with tiny flowers carved into the silver. She tried to open it, but the clasp seemed stuck. Years of being underwater had made it difficult to open. Catherine decided to take it back to the house and see if she could clean it up. Maybe she could find out who it belonged to and return it to them. Back at the house, Catherine sat at her mother's old kitchen table with the locket, some jewelry cleaner, and a soft cloth. As she gently cleaned the silver, the flowers on the front became more visible. They were roses, she realized, delicately carved with tiny leaves. It was clearly an expensive piece, probably an antique. After working on it for nearly an hour, Catherine finally managed to get the clasp to open. Inside, there were 2 small photographs, their faces barely visible after being damaged by water. But what caught her attention was the engraving on the inside of the locket. In elegant script, it read, "To my darling Margaret, with all my love forever. Your devoted William, 1943. Catherine stared at the inscription. The name Margaret was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. She knew it wasn't her mother's name, which was Elizabeth, and 1943 was long before her parents had even met. This locket belonged to someone from an earlier time, someone who had lived in this area decades ago. She decided to ask around town to see if anyone remembered a Margaret from that time. Millbrook was a small community where families had lived for generations. Someone was bound to remember. Her first stop was the local library. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian who had been there for as long as Catherine could remember, was organizing books when she walked in. "Catherine, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, looking up with a warm smile, "I was so sorry to hear about your father. He was such a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Actually, I was hoping you might be able to help me with something." Catherine showed her the locket and explained where she had found it. Mrs. Henderson adjusted her glasses and examined the locket carefully. "Margaret, 1943, she murmured thoughtfully. "You know, there was a Margaret Thompson who lived here around that time. She was a young woman during the war. But I believe she moved away sometime in the 1940s. Her family used to live in the old Victorian house on Elm Street." "Is that family still around?" Catherine asked. "Well, the Thompsons moved away long ago, but I think Margaret had a younger sister, Dorothy. I'm not sure what happened to her, though. You might want to check the old records in the town hall. Sometimes families stay in touch even when they move away. Catherine thanked Mrs. Henderson and decided to visit the town hall. The building was old and filled with filing cabinets containing decades of records. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Tom, was helpful, but warned her that records from the 1940s might be incomplete. After searching through several boxes, they found some information about the Thompson family. Margaret Thompson had indeed lived in Millbrook with her parents and younger sister Dorothy. According to the records, Margaret had married someone named William Harrison in 1943, which matched the inscription in the locket. It says here that William Harrison was a soldier, Tom explained, reading from an old document. He was stationed at the Army base about 50 miles from here during the war. It looks like Margaret and William got married just before he shipped out overseas. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Do you know what happened to them? Tom continued reading. This is interesting. It says that Margaret left town suddenly in late 1943, just a few months after her wedding. There's no record of her returning. And William... He paused, checking another document. William Harrison was reported missing in action in Italy in 1944. He was never found. Catherine's heart sank. So Margaret had lost her husband in the war and had left town, probably to escape the painful memories. But how had her locket ended up in the river behind Catherine's family home? What about Dorothy, her sister? Catherine asked. Let me see. Tom searched through more papers. Dorothy Thompson married a local man named James Parker in 1947. They had children and stayed in Millbrook for many years. I think some of their descendants might still be in the area. Catherine copied down the information about Dorothy Parker and decided to see if she could track down any of her descendants. If Margaret had left town suddenly, maybe she had given the locket to her sister for safekeeping. And somehow it had been lost over the years. That evening, Catherine called the phone number she had found for a James Parker Jr., who was listed in the current phone directory. When a woman answered, Catherine explained about finding the locket. "Oh my goodness," the woman said. Her name was Susan Parker, and she was Dorothy's daughter-in-law. Dorothy is actually still alive. She's in her 90s now and lives in the nursing home here in town. I'm sure she would remember Margaret's locket. She's talked about her sister many times over the years. Catherine felt a surge of excitement. Tomorrow she would visit Dorothy and hopefully learn more about Margaret and the mysterious locket. She carefully wrapped the locket in a soft cloth and placed it in her purse. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a sense of purpose, as if she was meant to find this piece of someone else's history and help complete their story. That night, as she lay in her childhood bedroom, Catherine couldn't help but wonder about Margaret. What had her life been like? Had she ever found love again after losing William? And why had she left her precious locket behind? Tomorrow, she hoped, some of these questions would be answered. The old house creaked gently around her as she drifted off to sleep, the locket safe on her nightstand. Outside, the river continued its endless flow, having given up one secret but surely holding many more in its depths. The next morning, Catherine drove to Millbrook Care Center with the locket carefully tucked in her purse. The nursing home was a pleasant building surrounded by gardens, where elderly residents could often be seen sitting on benches or walking the paths with their visitors. Susan Parker met her at the front desk. She was a kind-looking woman in her 50s with graying hair and gentle eyes. "Dorothy is having one of her good days today," Susan explained as they walked down the hallway. "Her memory comes and goes now, but when she talks about the old days, especially about Margaret, she's as sharp as ever." They found Dorothy sitting in a sunny common room, working on a crossword puzzle. Despite being in her 90s, she sat straight and alert. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and she wore a pretty blue sweater that brought out her still bright eyes. "Grandma Dorothy," Susan said gently. "This is Catherine Miller. She found something that belonged to Margaret." Dorothy looked up, and her eyes immediately focused on Catherine with surprising intensity. "Margaret?" she whispered. "My sister Margaret? But that was so long ago." Catherine sat down across from Dorothy and carefully pulled out the locket. When Dorothy saw it, her entire face changed. Her hands flew to her mouth, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, my dear Lord," Dorothy said, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch the locket. "I never thought I'd see this again. Where did you find it?" "In the river behind my family's house," Catherine said softly. "I was walking along the bank yesterday morning, and I spotted it in the shallow water." Dorothy held the locket as if it were made of the most delicate glass. "This was our grandmother's locket first. She gave it to Margaret when she turned 18. Margaret treasured it more than anything else she owned." Dorothy opened the locket and smiled through her tears. "William gave her new photographs for their wedding day. Look how young they were." Catherine could barely make out the water-damaged faces in the tiny photographs, but she could see they were a young couple, probably in their early 20s. "Can you tell me about Margaret and William?" Catherine asked gently. Dorothy's eyes grew distant as she traveled back in time. "Oh, they were so much in love. Margaret met William at a church dance in the spring of 1943. He was stationed at Camp Morrison, about an hour's drive from here. He would come to town every weekend he could get leave just to see her." Dorothy smiled at the memory. "William was tall and handsome, with dark hair and the kindest brown eyes you ever saw. And he was crazy about Margaret. She was beautiful, you know, golden hair that caught the light and a laugh that could make anyone happy. Everyone in town said they were perfect for each other." "They got married pretty quickly, didn't they?" Catherine asked. "Yes, in August 1943. It was a small ceremony at our little church downtown. Margaret wore our mother's wedding dress and she looked like an angel. William was so nervous during the ceremony that he dropped the ring twice." Dorothy chuckled at the memory. "But they were so happy, Catherine. I'll never forget how they looked at each other." Dorothy's expression grew sadder. But their happiness didn't last long. William shipped out to Italy just 3 weeks after their wedding. Margaret was heartbroken, but she was so brave. She wrote to him every single day and waited for his letters like they were the most precious things in the world. "What happened then?" Catherine asked, though she already suspected the answer would be painful. "The letters stopped coming in early 1944, Dorothy said quietly. "At first, Margaret thought maybe they were just delayed. Mail from overseas was often slow during the war. But then in March, we received the telegram." Dorothy's voice broke slightly. "William was missing in action. His unit had been in heavy fighting, and he had simply disappeared. No one knew if he was alive or dead." Catherine felt her heart ache for this couple she had never met. "How did Margaret handle the news?" "She fell apart," Dorothy said honestly. "For months, she held on to hope that he might still be alive, that maybe he was in a hospital somewhere or had been taken prisoner. She kept writing letters, even though she didn't know where to send them. She would wear that locket every single day and talk to William's picture inside it." Dorothy paused to wipe her eyes. But as the months went by with no word, Margaret became a shadow of herself. She stopped eating properly, stopped taking care of herself. Our parents were so worried. And then— "What happened?" Catherine asked softly. "In December of 1944, we got the final telegram. William had been officially declared killed in action. The Army had found enough evidence to confirm that his unit had been wiped out in an ambush. There was no hope left." Dorothy took a shaky breath before continuing. "Margaret completely broke down. She couldn't stop crying. She would sit by her bedroom window for hours, just staring at nothing, holding that locket. Our parents tried everything, doctors, ministers, friends, but nothing could reach her." "She must have been in terrible pain," Catherine said. "Oh, she was. And then, one morning in January 1945, we woke up and she was gone. She had packed a small bag and left during the night. She left a note saying she couldn't stay in Millbrook anymore, that everything reminded her of William and their plans together. She said she was going to California to stay with our Aunt Ruth. Catherine was puzzled. But if she went to California, how did the locket end up here? Dorothy smiled sadly. That's the mystery, isn't it? Margaret never took the locket with her when she left. I found it on her dresser the next morning, along with her wedding ring. She had left them behind deliberately. Why would she do that? I think she was trying to leave the pain behind too, Dorothy explained. The locket reminded her too much of William and their brief time together. She wanted to start completely over, without anything that would bring back the memories. So you kept the locket? Yes. I put it away safely in my jewelry box. I always hoped that someday Margaret might want it back, when the pain wasn't so fresh. I wrote to her a few times in California, but she never answered my letters. Eventually, I lost touch with her completely. Dorothy looked confused for a moment. But I don't understand how it ended up in the river. I kept that locket safe for years. Even when I got married and moved into my own house, I always kept it in a special place. Susan, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Grandma, do you remember the flood of 1963? You told me once that you lost some personal items when the basement flooded. Dorothy's eyes widened. Oh my goodness, yes. The spring flood of 1963. The river overflowed its banks and flooded half the town. Our basement was completely underwater for 3 days. She looked stricken. I had moved some of my special things down there in a waterproof box, but the water was so strong it must have carried some things away. The pieces were beginning to come together for Catherine. So the locket could have been washed out of your basement and carried downstream to where I found it. That makes sense, Dorothy said sadly. The current would have carried it right past your family's property. Oh, I feel terrible that I lost Margaret's precious locket. But you didn't lose it, Catherine said gently. I found it, and now it's back where it belongs, with someone who remembers Margaret and loves her. Dorothy clutched the locket to her chest. I wonder what happened to Margaret after she left. I've thought about her every day for 80 years, wondering if she ever found happiness again, if she ever got over losing William. Catherine had an idea. Dorothy, would you like me to help you try to find out what happened to Margaret? Maybe we could track her down in California, or at least find out if she had a family there? Dorothy's eyes lit up with hope. Do you think we could? I'm 93 years old, Catherine. I don't have much time left, and it would mean the world to me to know what became of my sister. We can try, Catherine said. I'll need all the information you can remember about your Aunt Ruth in California and anything else that might help us trace Margaret's path. As Dorothy began sharing everything she could remember about her family in California, Catherine felt a renewed sense of purpose. Finding the locket had been just the beginning. Now she was committed to solving a mystery that had lasted 80 years and hopefully bringing peace to an elderly woman who had spent a lifetime wondering about her lost sister. The locket sat on the table between them, its silver surface gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. It had kept Margaret and William's love story safe through decades underwater, and now it was about to help reunite two sisters who had been separated by grief and time. But Catherine had no idea that when they finally found Margaret, the truth would be more heartbreaking and beautiful than anyone could have imagined. Over the next 3 weeks, Catherine threw herself into research with a determination she hadn't felt in years. Armed with the information Dorothy had provided about their Aunt Ruth in Los Angeles, Catherine spent hours on the internet, making phone calls, and even hiring a genealogy researcher to help trace Margaret's path. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when the genealogist, Mrs. Chen, called with exciting news. I found her, she said. Margaret Thompson Harrison. She did go to California in 1945, and she lived there for several years with her Aunt Ruth. Catherine's heart raced. Is she still alive? I'm not sure yet, Mrs. Chen said carefully. But I have some information that you and Dorothy are going to want to hear in person. Can you meet me this afternoon? Catherine immediately drove to the nursing home to pick up Dorothy, who had been eagerly awaiting any news about her sister. Despite her age, Dorothy insisted on making the trip to meet with the genealogist. Mrs. Chen's office was filled with family trees, old photographs, and computer printouts. She greeted them warmly and invited them to sit down. What I found is quite remarkable, she began. Margaret did indeed live with her Aunt Ruth in Los Angeles from 1945 to 1950. During that time, she worked as a secretary for a law firm. Dorothy leaned forward eagerly. What happened after that? Mrs. Chen smiled gently. In 1950, Margaret married a man named Robert Chen. No relation to me, by the way. He was a kind widower with 2 young children who had lost his first wife to illness. Margaret became a stepmother to his children and eventually had 2 children of her own with Robert. So she found happiness again? Dorothy asked, tears in her eyes. It appears so. From what I could gather from records and some people I spoke with, Margaret and Robert had a good marriage that lasted 43 years, until Robert passed away in 1993. She was known in her community as a loving mother and grandmother who was very involved in her church and local charities. Catherine felt relieved for Margaret, but she noticed Mrs. Chen's expression had grown more serious. "What is it?" she asked. "Margaret passed away in 2019, Mrs. Chen said gently. She was 96 years old and lived in a retirement community in San Diego. But here's what's remarkable. She never forgot about William or her life in Millbrook." Mrs. Chen pulled out a folder. "I was able to speak with Margaret's daughter, Linda Chen Rodriguez, who lives in San Diego. When I told her about the locket and about Dorothy, she was amazed. She said her mother had told her children about her first husband who died in the war and about the sister she had left behind in a small town back east." Dorothy gasped. "She remembered me?" "More than that," Mrs. Chen said, opening the folder. "Linda said that every year on William's birthday and on their wedding anniversary, Margaret would light a candle and spend time looking at old photographs. She kept William's memory alive her entire life, even though she built a new and happy life with Robert." Mrs. Chen pulled out a photocopy of a handwritten letter. "Linda gave me permission to share this with you. Margaret wrote this letter to Dorothy in 1995, on the 50th anniversary of leaving Millbrook. She never sent it, but Linda found it among her mother's papers after she passed away." With trembling hands, Dorothy took the letter. Catherine moved closer so she could read it too. In Margaret's careful handwriting, it read, "My dearest Dorothy, today marks 50 years since I left home, and not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you. I know you must have wondered why I never answered your letters, why I cut myself off so completely from everything and everyone I loved. I was so broken when I left Dorothy. Losing William felt like losing part of my soul, and I was afraid that if I stayed connected to home, I would never be able to heal. I want you to know that I did heal, eventually. I found a good man who loved me, despite my damaged heart, and I learned to love again, though differently than I loved William. Robert understood that William would always be my first love, and he never asked me to forget him. I had 4 children, Dorothy, 2 stepchildren who became mine completely, and 2 biological children. They are good people who have given me grandchildren and great-grandchildren. My life has been full and blessed, but I've always regretted leaving the way I did. I was young and thought that running away was the only way to survive the pain. Now I know I should have stayed and grieved properly, surrounded by people who loved me. I should have kept in touch with you, my dear sister. I hope you found love and happiness. I hope you forgave me for abandoning you when you needed your sister too. Every Christmas, every birthday, every important moment of my life, I wondered what you were doing, whether you were well, whether you remembered me with love or anger. I kept the memory of our childhood, of mother and father, of our little house, and the river that ran behind it. Sometimes I dream about walking along that riverbank with you, talking and laughing like we used to do. I pray that you are well, and that life has been kind to you. If I could do it over again, I would never have left without saying goodbye properly. I would never have cut you out of my life so completely. All my love, always. Margaret. Dorothy was crying so hard she could barely speak. Catherine put her arm around the elderly woman's shoulders, feeling her own eyes fill with tears. She never forgot me, Dorothy whispered. She regretted leaving. Oh, Margaret, I never stopped loving you. Mrs. Chen waited patiently before continuing. There's more. Linda said that Margaret kept one photograph from her time with William their entire life. It was taken on their wedding day, and she told her children that it was the happiest day of her life, even though it was followed by such sorrow. What about Margaret's children? Catherine asked. Are they interested in connecting with Dorothy? Very much so, Mrs. Chen said. Linda said the whole family has always wanted to know about Margaret's sister and her life before California. They would love to meet Dorothy and learn about their mother's early years. Dorothy looked up with wonder in her eyes. I have a niece I've never met? And great-nieces and great-nephews? You have a large, extended family, Mrs. Chen confirmed. Linda has 3 children of her own, and Margaret's other children also have families. They've been planning a memorial service for Margaret on what would have been her 98th birthday next month. They've invited both of you to attend if you're able to travel. Catherine looked at Dorothy, who seemed to have aged backwards with joy and excitement. Would you like to go to California to meet Margaret's family? More than anything in the world, Dorothy said firmly. I may be 93, but I'm not missing the chance to meet my sister's children and grandchildren. As they prepared to leave Mrs. Chen's office, Catherine pulled out the locket one more time. Should we take this to them? She asked Dorothy. Dorothy thought for a moment, then shook her head. I think Margaret would want her daughter Linda to have it, don't you? It belongs with her family now. 4 weeks later, Catherine found herself on an airplane with Dorothy heading to San Diego. Despite her age, Dorothy had handled the travel arrangements with remarkable energy and determination. The flight was smooth, and Dorothy spent most of it looking out the window and talking about what she would say to Margaret's family. They were met at the airport by Linda Chen Rodriguez, a woman in her 60s with her mother's gentle smile and bright eyes. The resemblance to Dorothy was unmistakable. They had the same bone structure and the same way of tilting their heads when they listened. Aunt Dorothy, Linda said, embracing the elderly woman, I can't believe I'm finally meeting you. Mom would be so happy. The memorial service was held in a beautiful garden at the retirement community where Margaret had lived. About 50 people attended. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends, and neighbors who had known and loved Margaret during her long life in California. During the service, Dorothy spoke about growing up with Margaret, sharing stories that brought laughter and tears from the gathered family. She told them about Margaret's beautiful singing voice, her love of reading, and her kindness to stray animals and lonely neighbors. But the most powerful moment came when Catherine presented the locket to Linda. As Linda opened it and saw the faded photographs of her mother and William, the entire gathering fell silent. This locket traveled quite a journey to find its way back to Margaret's family, Catherine said. It spent nearly 60 years underwater, but it kept safe the love story that started Margaret's life and led eventually to all of you. Linda read aloud the inscription. To my darling Margaret, with all my love forever. Your devoted William, 1943. Then she looked up at the assembled family. Mom always said that William's love taught her how to love. Even though their time together was short, it showed her what real love looked like, and that's what allowed her to recognize it again when she met our father. After the service, Catherine found herself walking in Margaret's favorite garden with Linda and Dorothy. They sat on a bench overlooking a small pond, and Linda shared more stories about her mother's life. Mom lived to be 96, Linda said, and right until the end she was sharp and funny and full of love for her family. But every year on August 15th, her wedding anniversary with William, she would spend the day quietly, looking through old photographs and writing in her journal. She never forgot her first love, but she never let that stop her from embracing her second chance at happiness. Dorothy nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like Margaret. She always had such a big heart. I'm just so grateful to know that she found joy again after such terrible sadness. As the sun began to set, Linda turned to Catherine. I can't thank you enough for finding that locket and bringing Aunt Dorothy to us. You've given our family something precious, a connection to Mom's past that we never thought we'd have. Catherine smiled, thinking about the strange journey that had begun with a simple walk along the river. Sometimes I think we're meant to find certain things at certain times. Maybe Margaret somehow guided me to that locket, knowing it was time for her two families to connect. 3 months later, Catherine was back in Millbrook, but her life had changed completely. She had decided to keep her father's house and split her time between the city and the small town where she grew up. Dorothy had given her copies of all the letters and photographs Linda had shared about Margaret's life, and Catherine found herself thinking often about the power of love to survive loss and separation. The locket now lived with Linda in California, but it had done its work. It had brought together a family separated by decades and geography, and it had shown Catherine that sometimes the most important treasures are the connections we make with other people. On quiet mornings, Catherine would walk along the riverbank where she had found the locket, and she would think about Margaret and William, about Dorothy and the family she had found after 90 years of wandering. The river flowed peacefully past, carrying new stories and secrets. But for now, one old mystery had been solved. One love story had been completed, and one family had been reunited across time and distance. Margaret's lost locket had emerged from the river with its engraved message of eternal love, and in the end, it had broken them all, broken them open to the possibility of connection, healing, and the enduring power of love that transcends even death itself.